Jack Smith, the illegitimate prosecutor, released his report. As midnight struck, Merrick Garland and the DOJ hacks were there on their email account, ready to press send the moment the injunction from Judge Cannon expired. And this is Jack Smith's report. Remember that Jack Smith left the DOJ and they commemorated his terrible record and his service with a footnote at the bottom final page of their concluding paragraph in their filings in Florida. Pathetic. And now he released his report. This should have never been released because he's illegitimate. He stole $100 million, according to President Trump, 50 according to their own numbers. But those numbers are just a small sampling of the money they spent. So let's say $100 million bucks, maybe more, to prosecute Trump. He's not even a legitimate prosecutor, was never properly appointed, and accomplished nothing other than wrecking the credibility of the DOJ. He released this report. It's 174 pages. This is the big one on the J6 case. And if you parse through it, you'll see it's a bunch of the same garbage that we've seen before. And so we're not going to spend much time on it today. Even Kyle Cheney from Politico, who's been following this stuff maybe more closely than anybody in the mainstream news, shared this. The final report is out and it's kind of a dud. He says, okay, so what is the big takeaway? That Trump was not exonerated. All right. Was not exonerated. He was not convicted. So both of your cases were dismissed. He said that there was an unprecedented criminal effort, which he failed to secure any convictions on. And he said he's only off the hook because he won. So in other words, the American people vetoed Jack Smith's poor judgment and illegally concocted criminal prosecution. So he says, look, there isn't a ton of new info in the Smith report, as we were speculating, because they tried to release the whole report, more or less, before the election. That was part of Jack Smith's giant, disgusting dossier that they said that they could release to everybody. And Judge Chutkin, rather, before she dismissed the case, allowed him to release all that. And so we thought, okay, that's going to be their final attempt to stop Trump, try to release this big mess of materials and see if the media can latch onto it. The problem is there's nothing in there. The case is crap. So there's not a ton of new info, but there is some, says Kyle Cheney. For example, this signal exchange between Jeff Clark and Scott Perry, where Jeff Clark, shout out, who's doing a great job out there, revealed that he didn't learn anything useful for Trump in his classified election fraud briefing. All right. There were signal messages. Bottom line, nothing helpful to the president from one classified briefing somewhere. And guess who rigged the election? The people who would give you classified briefings, like the CIA when they were rigging things with Anthony Blinken. Said, I also believe that there are some direct quotes from interviews with false electors who claim to be duped. Those are new. And that's kind of it. There's not much else in there. So, okay, and that's the report. Jack Smith is now releasing it as he flees back to The Hague. Here's the report from Politico. They say Trump has not been exonerated, says Jack Smith. All right. That's the message from Jack. He laid out evidence that he said would have led to a conviction. But Trump's only off the hook because he won. That's right. He did win. The department's view that the Constitution prohibits the continued indictment and prosecution is categorical and does not turn on the gravity of the crimes. The strength of our case are the merits of our prosecution, he wrote. The admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction. Well, you didn't get him, though. You didn't get him. The Justice Department is withholding for now the classified documents case because we have a hearing on that on Friday. And the volume on the election case summarizes the trove of evidence that they claim they got. They interviewed a bunch of people, 250 people, 55 grand jury witnesses, Jeffrey Clark and others, explaining the same thing that they've been screeching about, like pathetic losers for the last 4 years or so, give or take. Says it was a late night release and there was a lot of activity last night, man. It was pinging off everybody's phones, but there was some activity. Let me see if I can pull this up. Yeah. So this was the docket in Florida. And here is what was happening yesterday. So after the show, when we finished the show, there was a battle. Judge Cannon had already issued an order saying that she was going to be releasing some materials to the public. So then what happened is Trump filed a response And that came skidding in late at night. And here's what Trump said. Well, this was a notice. Let me see. Did I have that one queued up? Yeah, Trump submitted a filing late last night and was basically saying, do not release this. And it doesn't look like it's on this docket yet. But then they came out and Judge Cannon denied their order. And what happened was they released the report. So you can see even Anna Bauer was reporting this. There was 2 hours to go until the release. The president-elect, so Trump's counsel, filed another motion, right? This came out, I don't think you can see the time on this, but it was like, 10 o'clock at night, my time, or very, very late. So they submitted this. This is Trump's supplemental motion to stop the release of the report. Submitted all this. Of course, Judge Cannon took it and then denied it. They say today the court issued an order denying Trump's requested relief. But the court hasn't ruled on other motions. Trump filed to intervene. And so, in other words, Judge, you're too soon. You can't release this report yet because you haven't even heard Trump's arguments. They say, in addition to being unlawful, the publication of the final report serves no public interest. And it turns out it doesn't really, actually. It's the same garbage that was in his prior useless reports. This is especially true of Volume 1. They say that Smith has already abused his office to engage in an egregious series of public attacks on Trump. There's a lengthy speaking indictment that we read, numerous public filings, endless anonymous leaks, procedurally irregular 185-page broadside that they filed against Trump before the election. Yet another report would serve no purpose other than an attempt to smear Trump and attack his character. But the DOJ even itself admits that imposing stigma and opprobrium threatens a president's executive power. That's why they dismiss the cases against him. Such pointless stigma and opprobrium would attempt to undermine President Trump and his standing with world leaders, his domestic political actors who are here, the public, and more, which is what they're trying to do. Now, it's falling flat, I think. Even the media is not talking too much about it. We'll go back and see what they're up to. But they say, look, this impedes the president. Any disruption that impedes the president could be a problem. Never before in our nation's history has the Department of Justice attempted to interfere with an incoming presidential administration in this manner. It's interference with the peaceful transition is what it is, let alone on the very eve of the inauguration by means of a false report issued by a discredited prosecutor like Jack, who is now resigned in disgrace. Nor should the court permit the department to do so until providing Trump with an opportunity to be heard. Trump respectfully submits that the court can hear argument on his motion. So listen to, at least hear from us before you give the DOJ permission to release all this stuff. Trump respectfully requests that the court allow Trump to intervene and then, of course, hear his arguments. This sensible course will ensure full ventilation of these important issues, which are not changed by what they say is in Volume 1. These issues are weighty. And so government says that they're going to release the volume right after midnight. And they did, man. It was like 12:01. Merrick Garland's like, send. Did you get it? Okay. The government counsel advises that we're releasing it. And of course, they did release it, signed by John Lauro and Gregory Singer. So the report is now out. It's basically a dud. Even the cables aren't spending a lot of time on it this morning. You'd expect it to be all over the place, right? All the J6 hysterics like Joe Scarborough going nuts about it. In fact, Fox News is the only station right now talking about it.
Pence, the vice president then, and so
Andy
on.
McCarthy.
In each of those schemes, Bill, there are people who are, we now know, of course, that they are lawyers. They're, because of Justice Department rules, they're not named in the indictment, but we know who they are. They're closely scheming with Trump and doing most of the legwork in each of these schemes as Smith describes them. Yet it's not, he goes on to say we couldn't charge because, Trump became president and we have these rules that you can't indict or prosecute a sitting president. None of those other people are government officials. None of them had immunity. If he really thought that he had a strong case, you would have seen them indicted.
So he argued that he could have gotten a conviction. Prosecutors are always going to argue that. In a word, should this have been made public, yes or no, Andy?
No, he's illegitimate.
I think, Bill, the custom has now become that they're made public by the regulation. They're supposed to be confidential reports. I think it really doesn't matter. 3 weeks before the election, he did a 2,000-page proffer of his entire case. There's nothing in this report that's
useless.
different from what was in the proffer.
In the meantime, David Weiss, final report on Hunter Biden. Okay.
also dropped.
He says other presidents have pardoned family members, but in doing so, none have taken the occasion as an opportunity to malign the public servants at a DOJ based solely on false accusations. To which Hunter Biden's attorney says what's clear from the report is that the investigation into Hunter Biden is a cautionary tale of the abuse of prosecutorial power, which reflects the letter that came from President Biden when he said it was selective and unfair and raw politics. And, well, Weiss is just feeding into, Law is feeding into what Weiss concluded here as it relates to Hunter Biden. How do you see it?
Well, I think Weiss was in on the problem
From the beginning.
until he got religion at the end.
Yeah.
The problem here wasn't
part of the
selective
cover-up.
prosecution. It was selective favorable treatment, that Weiss was the chief person who gave to Hunter Biden for years in this investigation, to the point of sitting on his hands while the statute of limitations ate a lot of his cases. When the sweetheart plea blew up and he was humiliated, then he turned around and prosecuted the president's son. But that case should have been brought years before.
Yeah. Andy, thank you.
Yeah, and Weiss was part of the cover-up attempt. They tried to get Hunter a non-prosecution agreement so that he didn't get any charges filed. And the only reason that any of that came out was because of the whistleblowers. And then David Weiss had to start to backtrack on that because people started to realize he's corrupt. Then he comes out and he writes this report